Tonight on Nova.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima.
The bomb, the most deadly killing machine ever invented, born in the mind of this man, Leo Szilard, who believed it was needed to defeat the Nazis and spent the rest of his life trying to control his fearful creation. Ed Asner narrates the surprising story of the genius behind the bomb.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership. And Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.
New York City, July 12th, 1939. While Europe careens toward war, Americans enjoy the bright summer days in isolationist innocence. But at his summer home on Long Island, Albert Einstein was hearing about a frightening development in physics from an old friend, Leo Szilard. That afternoon, Szilard persuaded Einstein to help launch a drive for the ultimate weapon, the atom bomb. Szilard was the first to see how such a weapon could be built, and he understood its terrible implications. Several years later, in a laboratory in Chicago, Szilard watched a team led by Enrico Fermi ignite the first nuclear chain reaction on Earth, a crucial step toward making the bomb.
On that day, my only function was to say, I told you so. I shook hands with Fermi and said, I believe this will go down as a black day in the history of mankind.
For the rest of his life, Szilard produced a stream of ideas for taming the atomic genie, but none worked as well as the idea that unleashed it. He was arrogant, abrasive, and brilliant. He was also an eccentric nomad, living most of his life in hotel rooms with 2 packed suitcases always ready to leave.
I think I would have preferred to have roots, but if I couldn't have roots, I wanted to have wings.
Leo Szilard was born in Budapest, Hungary. It was 1898, an era of optimism. People felt good about the accomplishments of civilization. It was a time of great scientific and technological progress. Leo was born into a middle-class Jewish family, the oldest of 3 children. His brother's name was Bela.
I almost would say he looked like a serious scientist at age 1, which is, of course, ridiculous. He didn't know anything yet. But the funny thing is that all his youthful pictures, 6 years old, 4 years old, even 11 years old, school pictures in high school, he is dead serious. He wanted always to be different. How consciously, I can't tell you. But he was dressed differently from his schoolmates.
He lived in a prosperous home in a confident nation. But as he grew to be a teenager, Leo's world was shattered. Leo was 16 when World War I broke out. When it was over, political chaos reigned in Budapest. First, communists took over, then fascists. Leo and his brother fled to Berlin. Berlin was the capital of a defeated nation, but it was also a center of culture and science. Szilard first studied chemistry, but soon he was drawn to the small circle of physicists who were creating revolutionary theories about the atom and the universe. Leo went straight to the top, and introduced himself to Albert Einstein.
After one of these student seminars, I showed him something that I have done, where I wanted to have his criticism. And this is the first time I really had contact with him, and ever thereafter we remained in very close contact. I very often walked him home from the journal club. He lived at about 20 minutes walk from the university. Somehow Einstein was interested to talk to me about everything in the world, and of course I was very pleased and interested in what he had to say.
Victor Weisskopf was a young student when he met Szilard in Berlin. They became lifelong friends.
And at that time, actually, he worked on a most interesting subject, essentially alone, but I do think that Einstein was very interested in what he did. And he worked on the theory of what one now calls cybernetics. And that is about 30 years before cybernetics came into fashion.
Szilard's work was promptly accepted as his doctoral dissertation. Later, the work was recognized as a precursor to modern computer theory. Einstein took a liking to Szilard, and they filed 8 joint patents during this period, including several for a new kind of refrigerator.
Leo and Einstein reading one day in the newspaper that there had been an accident in some home where a family of 6 or 8 had all died asphyxiated because of fumes from a primitive refrigerator, that had toxic fumes that had escaped during the night into their apartment, and through a leaky valve in the pump in the refrigerator. And Szilard and Einstein said there must be a better way of pumping things around that won't lead to that kind of thing, and they dreamed up the electromagnetic pump.
The pump proved too noisy to use in a home. Later, Szilard would use the same design to cool nuclear reactors. But Szilard's social concerns were much broader than safe refrigeration. In the late 1920s, he tried unsuccessfully to start an organization made up of the intellectual elite of all nations, which he thought would lead the world along the path of enlightenment and reason. It was the first of many Szilard schemes for saving the world. Einstein was skeptical. He said his young friend was overestimating the power of reason in human affairs. Events soon proved Einstein was right. In Germany, the Nazis were demonstrating the power of hate. Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933, and Szilard soon saw what was coming.
I had my suitcases packed. By this I mean that I had literally 2 suitcases which were packed, with the key in the lock, so that I could leave Germany at any moment.
Then the Reichstag, seat of the German parliament, burned down. The Nazis blamed the communists and consolidated their grip on the nation.
After the Reichstag fire, I decided the moment has come. I closed my suitcases and I took a train to Vienna. The train was empty. The same train on the next day was overcrowded. It was stopped at the frontier, the people had to get out, and everybody was interrogated by the Nazis. This just goes to show that if you want to succeed in this world, you don't have to be much cleverer than other people, you just have to be one day earlier.
From Vienna, Szilard went to London, where he found many Englishmen were waking up to the Nazi threat. Szilard played a leading role in finding jobs for Jewish refugee scholars in English universities. One of those who helped him was a physicist named Hans Bethe.
He was everywhere trying to find other people who needed help, trying to find places. He would appear quite unexpectedly at many different places when we had scientific discussions. And so we decided that Szilard really was like one of the modern particles, which could be annihilated, disappear, and then could be created again. And so we used to say, now Szilard has again materialized in front of us. And it was claimed that he was seen at several places at once.
While hounding the universities to hire refugees, Szilard also kept thinking about the new science of the atom. Using simple laboratory equipment, Ernest Rutherford and other physicists had discovered that the atom was mostly empty space, with electrons orbiting around a tiny nucleus. The nucleus was 1,000 billion times smaller than the atom. It was usually stable and unchanging. But in some elements, the nucleus could flare up and transform into a different element. This was called radioactivity. Normally, radioactive elements only go off a few atoms at a time. But the physicists realized that if trillions of nuclei could be set off at once, there would be a gigantic explosion. Some physicists thought the sun's enormous energy might involve nuclear reactions. Rutherford and the other leading scientists thought this awesome power could not be released here on Earth, but that just made Szilard more eager to try. As he waited to cross a London street in the fall of 1933, Szilard suddenly saw how to make a reaction spread from a few nuclei to trillions. In a 1960 interview, he explained how the insight emerged as he thought about Rutherford and an H.G. Wells science fiction story about a nuclear war.
In that war, London, Chicago, Paris, and other cities are destroyed. He puts this war into the year 1956. This is the most remarkable prediction that I ever see. And this book had a very great influence on me. And when, after the neutrons were discovered, and when I was in London, I saw that Lord Rutherford had said that whoever talks about liberating atomic energy on an industrial scale is talking moonshine. I was pondering about this as I was walking along the streets of London, and I was standing on the curb of Southend Row when the light suddenly turned green, and when I suddenly saw the answer. And the answer was, if one could find an element that would emit 2 neutrons when it absorbs 1 neutron, an element which has an atom which is unstable and emits 2 neutrons when it absorbs 1 neutron, then such an element could sustain a nuclear chain reaction if it were assembled in a critical mass.
What Szilard saw in his mind's eye was a neutron hitting a nucleus and knocking out 2 more neutrons, the first step in a chain reaction which would feed on itself, ultimately releasing the energy of all the nuclei. This was a blueprint for the atom bomb, and Szilard was both thrilled and terrified at the prospect. To establish his claim to the idea and yet hide it from German intelligence, Szilard took out 2 patents, a public patent with vague references to energy storage and a secret patent in which he described an explosive. Years later, the U.S. government bought all his patent rights for $15,000.
He saw the probability of a nuclear reaction with macroscopic amounts of matter. That means real physical changes in the world, like explosions or power plants, when the best physicists, like Rutherford, couldn't see that that was ever possible. They knew the energy was there, but they couldn't see how many atoms could be convinced to act together. Szilard saw that the month after the neutron was discovered. And he went around Europe for 5 years or so, explaining how this was sure to come one way or another. And he was quite right. When I heard it, I believed it was wrong. But I was wrong.
Szilard even sketched out what a chain reaction machine would look like. But he was missing a crucial piece of information. He didn't know which element would chain react. Uranium was only one possibility out of many. So he proposed a research project to try all the elements.
This total cost of the project was going to be something like $8,000. And the head of the department felt this is far too big a sum to spend on research. And therefore the whole project fell through, and he didn't do it. And Leo then told me that In fact, he ought to be awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for not doing carrying out this work, because otherwise the bomb would have been discovered several years earlier and could have had quite a big difference to the whole history of mankind.
In 1938, Szilard, expecting war in Europe, moved to America. Soon, electrifying news reached him from Germany. Scientists in Berlin had split uranium atoms by bombarding them with neutrons. If the reaction produced extra neutrons, uranium might be the element to make a chain reaction bomb. Now, scientists all over the world saw the possibilities. Szilard was convinced that the Nazis would try to make a bomb. So on July 12, 1939, Leo Szilard and fellow Hungarian physicist Eugene Wigner drove out of Manhattan. They passed the World's Fair, whose theme was Building the Future Using the Benefits of Science. The two scientists headed for Albert Einstein's summer home on Long Island. Szilard wanted to use Einstein's famous name to alert government officials.
I was afraid originally that it will take a long time before he realizes not only the existence of the process, but also its possibly terrible implications. But I was mistaken. I didn't look at my watch when I told him about the process, but I now think it took about 15, perhaps 20 minutes to explain it to him, and he realized at once that there is a serious danger present.
Since the Belgian Congo had the world's largest supply of uranium, they talked about warning the government of Belgium to keep the uranium from falling into Nazi hands. But they decided that first they should tell President Roosevelt about the bomb. Einstein dictated a draft letter and sent Wigner and Szilard to work on it.
We knew what we wanted to say, but we had a problem. How can we say what we had to say in a short enough way so the president can read it? Finally, we decided that atomic energy will rate 1.5 pages single-spaced.
Edward Teller, a third Jewish Hungarian refugee, drove Szilard to Einstein's house for a final meeting on July 30th.
I entered history as Szilard's chauffeur, trying to find Einstein at the northern tip of Long Island. Einstein received us in slippers, gave Szilard and his chauffeur some tea, read the letter, and signed it.
Alexander Sachs, a personal friend of FDR, agreed to deliver the letter, but Sachs couldn't get an appointment for 2 months. The president's aides said he was too busy dealing with disastrous developments in Europe. On September 1st, Hitler's armies smashed into Poland. Finally, on October 11th, Einstein's letter reached the Oval Office. Roosevelt set up a committee to look into the matter. Szilard, Teller, and Wigner were invited to explain their case.
I think it was Teller who presented the problem, and the army colonel said, "Oh, gentlemen, don't worry. Wars are not won by new weapons, but by the morale of the civilian population." And I said, "Well, Colonel, let us then disband the army and spread its wonderful morale among the civilian population." And the Navy commander thereupon asked, "Well, gentlemen, how much money do you want?" And I said, very foolishly, $6,000. He said, "You have it." And we indeed got it. But of course the $6,000 was very, very little for the project, which eventually took up millions of dollars.
Szilard teamed up with Nobel Prize winner Enrico Fermi to lead the research effort, which was later given the code name Manhattan District.
Fermi was the careful scientist who planned every step, every detail, completely opposite to Leo. Leo was averse to any kind of planning. He had the flashy ideas. No, that's all wrong, we do it that way. Of course, sometimes Leo and he fought about it, and Fermi fought about this.
It wasn't going to be easy. Experiments showed that uranium would not chain react because neutrons could only split a rare light type of uranium nucleus called U-235. Most uranium was a slightly heavier form, which would absorb neutrons and stop the chain reaction. But Fermi and Szilard thought they saw a way around the problem. Their idea was to surround spheres of uranium with graphite. The graphite would allow the neutrons to bounce around and lose speed. Once the neutrons slowed down, the heavy type of uranium would no longer absorb them, but they could still split the light form. That was the key to making the chain reaction work. Atom bomb scientists in Germany also tried using graphite, but their tests mistakenly showed that graphite absorbed neutrons, so they abandoned it.
Now, in this country, Fermi and Szilard also found a similar result to begin with, but they both said that probably the absorption of neutrons by graphite was due to impurities. And so Szilard, remembering his early training as a chemical engineer, said, oh yes, to make graphite, you use electrodes which contain boron. And so I will go and look. And he finally persuaded one of the chief manufacturers to make some graphite without the use of boron. And that graphite then turned out, by Fermi's experiments, to be suitable as a reactor medium. So Szilard contributed in a very major way to the early success of perhaps the most important branch of the Manhattan District.
Using ultra-pure graphite, Fermi's group calculated that a chain reaction was possible. But would it make a practical weapon? They weren't sure, but they were terrified of what would happen if Hitler got the bomb first.
All the time we ran scared. We felt they were a year or 2 years ahead of us, for sure. A lot of evidence came in on both sides, false and true, cheerful and pessimistic. You couldn't tell what was going on. So you tended very naturally to assume the worst, and the worst was the Germans were getting ahead of us.
After months of calculations and experiments, the physicists concluded that the slow neutron chain reaction would not work as a bomb after all, because it wouldn't release energy fast enough to explode. But they came up with two new strategies which probably would work. One way involved an extremely difficult process for separating the light, explosive uranium from the heavy form. Just a few pounds of purified light uranium would make a bomb, but the separation would take a massive industrial operation. The second way was to run a slow chain reaction in uranium and graphite and let the heavy uranium absorb neutrons. After a couple of days, the neutrons would change heavy uranium into a new explosive element, plutonium, which could be separated and made into bombs. In early 1942, the project was moved to the University of Chicago, where Fermi and Szilard set up a makeshift laboratory under the bleachers of a football stadium.
The experiments to make the first reacting pile were on a grand physical scale. They were rather simple-minded, but they were very big. First you had a pile of graphite the size of a desk, and then the size of a car, and then the size of a bus. And the one that finally worked was the size of a house. all made of nice black bars like that, the same stuff but intensely purified, as is in a soft pencil lead, and gets the same way on your fingers, a beautiful black, greasy coating. Everybody was covered with it, fingers, face, clothing, shoes, but fortunately it washes off quite well.
Only Szilard kept his hands clean. He felt his time should be reserved for thinking and calculating, much to the annoyance of Fermi, who wanted everyone to share the dirty work. December 2nd, 1942. 2.5 years have passed since Leo Szilard journeyed out to Long Island to visit Albert Einstein. The atomic scientists are finally ready to test the world's first nuclear reactor. The reactor is a 20-foot pile of 45,000 black graphite bricks with 19,000 balls of uranium embedded inside the graphite. Fermi orders the neutron-absorbing control rods pulled slowly out of the pile. The only sign that anything is happening is the increasing clicking of the radiation meter, which measures the neutron flow inside the uranium. Suddenly, the needle goes off the scale. The chain reaction has begun. Fermi announces, "Gentlemen, the pile has gone critical. If the reaction continues, it will lead to the first meltdown in history and kill everyone in the room." Finally, Fermi orders the control rods put back into the uranium. The way is clear to make plutonium and build the bomb. The scientists celebrate, but Szilard tells Fermi it is a black day for mankind. The U.S. Army, in the person of General Leslie Groves, was now in charge of the bomb project, and it grew from laboratory to industry. Project leaders decided to pursue both possible ways to make bombs, with plutonium and with U-235, because they weren't sure which way would work fastest. Cost was no object. By 1942, the Nazis had given up trying to make a bomb, but the Americans didn't know that. In the New Mexico desert at Los Alamos, a top-secret research center was created to design and build the new weapon. Leo Szilard was not invited to go there. Left in Chicago, his influence and importance in the project were declining.
In the beginning, when it's small, Szilard was the prime insider. He knew everything. He knew that there was uranium in Belgian Congo. He knew all those things which nobody else knew or thought about. But after a while, he became more and more of an outsider. After 1942 or 3, he was pretty much an outsider. General Groves and the project was a big institution with many sites and thousands of people. And Szilard was still the same person, quite clever, but only one man. And so he naturally passed from insider to outsider as the world grew.
The scientist who started the Manhattan Project was becoming just a thorn in the side of the general in charge.
The general took an immediate dislike to Szilard because Szilard talked back to him. The general wasn't used to that at all. And Szilard didn't know how to do anything other than call a spade a spade. And when the general said something dumb, Szilard pointed out how dumb it was.
Szilard accused Groves of bungling the project with stifling bureaucracy and a ridiculous level of secrecy. Groves ran the Manhattan Project as a military operation. This angered many scientists who were accustomed to the free flow of information. Szilard was his most vocal opponent. Groves asked Secretary of War Henry Stimson to have Szilard interned as a dangerous enemy alien. Stimson refused. So Groves got Army intelligence to put a tail on Szilard in case he was passing vital secrets to the Nazis. The agents reported, the subject frequently makes purchases in delicatessen stores, speaks occasionally in a foreign tongue, and associates mostly with people of Jewish extraction. They also found out that he received intimate letters from a young doctor, Trude Weiss. Leo and Trude had met in Berlin 10 years earlier. With up to 7 agents watching him, Szilard couldn't help but notice, especially after the surveillance instructions were sent to Szilard by accident. But Szilard still kept up a barrage of criticism, sending memos to his colleagues and to Grove's superior in Washington, the head of government research, Vannevar Bush. Szilard's purpose was not just to complain about Grove's, but to speed up development of the bomb so that it could be used before the war was over. Conventional bombs were ripping apart Europe. With nuclear weapons, Szilard feared nations would panic and lash out rather than risk being annihilated in a surprise attack. World War II would be just a pale foreshadowing of the next war, unless governments set up a world authority to control the new weapons. But he didn't think that could happen until the world had witnessed the destructive power of the atom.
It will hardly be possible to get political action along that line unless high-efficiency atomic bombs have actually been used in this war, and the fact of their destructive power has deeply penetrated the mind of the public.
Szilard thought the U.S. had to drop the bomb to teach the world a lesson. By the spring of 1945, the Nazi threat that had started the race to build the atomic bomb was finally crushed. The European allies rejoiced amid the ruins of their continent. In the Pacific, the bloody war continued. But now Leo Szilard changed his mind about dropping the bomb. Somehow his old arguments no longer made sense to him.
When the war against Germany was won, there didn't seem any good reason to use a bomb against Japan. Japan could not have won the war after Germany has lost it. So not only I, but many people, particularly in Chicago, felt that it would be a very serious mistake, that it wouldn't be morally justifiable to drop bombs on Japanese cities.
Szilard was again the leader in the movement at Chicago at the Metallurgical Laboratory to persuade the United States government not to drop the atomic bomb on cities in Japan. That certainly created a big stir, and there was a lot of argument in favor of his opinion. I think it was hopeless from the beginning that the U.S. government would agree to this.
Crisscrossing the nation, Szilard worked furiously to persuade top government officials not to bomb the Japanese. He argued that dropping the bomb would set off an arms race with the Soviets, and predicted that they would have their own bomb in less than 5 years. First, he tried to get in to see President Roosevelt and make his case directly. But Roosevelt died of a stroke before Szilard could reach him. Szilard tried to contact Harry Truman, the new president. Truman sent him to his chief advisor, James Burns, but Burns was not convinced. He was annoyed that a physicist should lecture him on world affairs.
I was rarely as depressed as when we left Burns' house and walked toward the station. I thought to myself, how much better the world might be off had I been born in America and become influential in American politics, and had Burns been born in Hungary and studied physics. In all probability, there would have been no atomic bomb and no danger of an arms race.
Defeated in Washington, Szilard retreated to Chicago to rally support from his fellow atomic scientists with a petition drive. He sent the petition to Los Alamos, addressed to Edward Teller.
Szilard very often caused me to think about things seriously. I did not always agree with him, but on this occasion I felt that he was right.
But Los Alamos director Robert Oppenheimer talked Teller out of helping Szilard.
He told me not to do anything. He told me that Szilard was using the influence of a scientist in an improper way. That neither Szilard nor I nor the majority of the people at Los Alamos did have proper and sufficient information.
In Chicago, 68 Manhattan Project scientists signed the petition asking President Truman not to drop atom bombs on Japan. Even Szilard knew the petition would fail. His ability to influence government policy from the inside had long since disappeared. Now all he could do was wait.
A short time ago, an American airplane dropped one bomb on Hiroshima and destroyed its usefulness to the enemy. If they do not now accept our terms, they may expect a rain of ruin from the air, the like of which has never been seen on this earth.
Szilard's vision crossing a London street 11 years earlier of a chain reaction unleashing the power of the atom was now a reality. He wrote to his friend Trude Weiss.
I suppose you have seen today's newspapers. Using atomic bombs against Japan is one of the greatest blunders of history. I went out of my way to prevent it, but without success. It is very difficult to see what wise course of action is possible from here on.
His uncertainty didn't last long. Soon, Szilard embarked on a public campaign to keep his bomb from destroying the world. The atomic scientists were war heroes, and Szilard took full advantage of his new celebrity status.
Politics has been defined as the art of the possible. Science might be defined as the art of the impossible. The crisis which is upon us may not find its ultimate solution until the statesmen catch up with the scientists. And politics, too, becomes the art of the impossible.
After the war, Szilard found out how to be an outsider. He began to write books. He began to organize political action. He began to circulate petitions. He always appeared in the media criticizing and trying to draw strange new connections that nobody had seen before. And I think his contribution as an outsider was more important, more lasting than his contribution as an insider.
I was a member of the emergency committee of atomic scientists after the war. The chairman of that committee was Albert Einstein. But the real moving force was Leo Szilard.
The slogan of the scientist movement at that time was very simple. 3 points. There's no secret about making nuclear weapons. There's no defense against nuclear weapons. I mean, you just have to deliver a nuclear weapon, and there are many possible ways, and a single nuclear weapon can destroy a large city. And therefore, there must be international control.
But the Cold War was getting underway. Anti-communism swept America. The nation was in no mood for accommodation with the Soviets.
Already an iron curtain had dropped around Poland, Hungary, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria.
In 1949, the Soviets exploded their first atomic bomb. It had taken them 4 years, just about what Szilard had expected. The arms race seemed unstoppable. For once, Leo Szilard gave up on saving the world. Instead, he threw his energy into a new science.
He moved away from physics to biology. I must say I admired that enormously. The thing I felt about Leo was that he didn't want to be involved in a phenomenon of death. He wanted to be involved in a phenomenon of life.
He and I had discussions about this. And indeed, he sort of wanted to persuade me, too, to leave physics and go into biology. And he said, you know, the physics problems have been solved. And indeed, he switched over. He went to several laboratories in the United States, biological laboratories, worked with them, worked himself into it. He is the discussion man, you know. He is not the guy who sits on the desk and reads papers and writes papers. He wants to talk, you know. He needs a lot of people to excite him and him to excite those people with new ideas.
Szilard quickly began spinning off theories about viruses, memory, aging, the immune system. He designed a new laboratory device for growing bacteria. But outside the laboratory in the 1950s, the US and the USSR were developing long-range missiles, which would allow them to annihilate each other in half an hour. The bomb was making the world even more unstable and dangerous than Szilard had predicted. He couldn't sit on the sidelines for long. Soon he was deeply involved in a new scheme to save the world. A series of informal meetings between scientists from East and West would break through Cold War barriers. The first meeting was held in the small Canadian town of Pugwash, Nova Scotia. The meetings got bigger and moved to other cities around the world. These conferences helped pave the way for several arms-controlled treaties.
Szilard's role was primarily one he always enjoyed, which was that of being a gadfly. I mean, he would always introduce somewhat offbeat new ideas and push for people to discuss new approaches, new ways of thinking about things.
Nuclear tests were spreading radioactive dust around the world, and Pugwash scientists wanted them stopped. But Szilard disagreed.
How do you look upon the danger of continuing nuclear tests with either clean or dirty bombs?
Well, I think that the danger of the test, the dust which they spread, is so far not very great. And I believe that we will have to continue testing in order to develop a powerful clean hydrogen bomb. However, let me say this, that developing the clean hydrogen bombs will do us very little good unless we teach the Russians how to do it also.
Szilard was a dedicated, clear, strong, nonconformist. He believed that whatever he said, whatever he did, must be unexpected. Otherwise, it was not worth doing.
Szilard was no longer pushing for world government, at least not right away. But he presented many offbeat ideas for stabilizing the nuclear standoff. Some of them involved elaborate game plans, rules of war to keep a conflict from escalating to Armageddon.
There is a saying that says, logics is a systematic method to arrive at the wrong conclusion with confidence. And there's something to it. You see, in his writings, he made a lot of proposals. Like, for example, that every American city should have a brother city, I wouldn't call it brother, an enemy city in Soviet Russia. And if that city is destroyed, the American city will be destroyed. I mean, an idea that is, logically correct, but from a human angle, absolutely impossible.
With his provocative ideas and enthusiasm, Szilard was at the center of an international community of scientists. He had friends and admirers all around the world, but many people found him abrasive and arrogant.
He irritated people and made, for trivial reasons, many enemies. He irritated by giving unwanted advice, not only in important matters, but in complete trivialities, like he's telling me which train I should take to New York.
He was rather withdrawn at various times, and it would occur to me that this was a terribly lonely man, almost desolatingly lonely. It may well have been linked with this difficulty of really relating, of really making personal commitments.
Szilard had finally married Trude Weiss in 1951, more than 20 years after they met in Berlin. But even marriage didn't change his lifestyle. He and Trude only lived together a few months out of the year. Leo Szilard remained a solitary nomad.
It was always said he has a wife in Denver, where Trudy worked. He has an office in Chicago. He has a job in Chicago and lives in a hotel in New York. Also, the way he lived, you see, was in some ways inhuman. And when he came to parties, as he always very much liked to do, he dominates, of course, the party. He tells his theories and what should be done. But at the same time, when things are no longer interesting, he leaves. So one has the feeling there is very little empathy towards the other people. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't think of the people. All his schemes was to save the world.
In 1959, Szilard entered New York's Memorial Hospital with bladder cancer. The doctors gave him 6 months to live. He began a period of frenetic activity, dictating letters to world leaders, meeting with colleagues, receiving reporters.
Dr. Leo Szilard is a Hungarian, a biophysicist, and more than any other living man, personally responsible for the development of the atomic bomb. And that is partly how he spent his life. He is spending his final months instructing us in the grave responsibilities of living with his bomb.
The 1960 presidential campaign had just begun, but Szilard had already drafted a letter to the victor.
Sir, I cannot address you by name, for I do not know who you may be. And because I am not well, I dare not defer writing this letter very much longer. The problem posed by the bomb can only be solved by abolishing war. And there are two schools of thought on how this may be accomplished. One school holds that America and Russia could abolish war by getting rid of the bomb in a setting of general and far-reaching disarmament. The other school holds that America and Russia could abolish war by retaining the bomb and finding a way to live with it.
Szilard argued that war could be avoided either with the bomb or without it, if statesmen learned to be more creative in handling world problems. As an example, he offered an unusual idea about how nations could convince each other that they were complying with arms control treaties.
They can convince each other by completely different methods. For instance, all America perhaps might have to do is to make spying a little easier.
Spying, yeah.
Yeah, and this will satisfy Russia. She will have enough spies to learn of a secret invasion.
Szilard dictated much of his advice in the form of a science fiction story, The Voice of the Dolphins. In this tale, a group of savvy dolphins conspire with Soviet and American scientists to save the world. Then Szilard did something which surprised even him. He cured himself. Disregarding the advice of cancer specialists, he researched the medical literature with his physician wife, Trude, and designed his own course of radiation therapy, taking much stronger doses than the experts were prescribing. He was only hoping to postpone the inevitable for a few months, but soon he actually began to feel better. By November 1960, he was well enough to leave the hospital temporarily for a televised debate with his old friend, Edward Teller. Teller was now a leading advocate of a hard line against the Soviets.
I have frequently listened to Szilard over several decades in the past with great interest. He has a unique gift. He can predict the future. He predicts it wrongly, but he predicts it more correctly than most people. And therefore it's worthwhile to listen to him.
At the time, the United States and the Soviet Union were negotiating to stop nuclear tests. Teller wanted the talks broken off.
The question is now, should we break off these negotiations on the grounds that Russians cheat? I would say this, that I recognize, I agree with Teller, that there is such a thing as irresponsible trustfulness. But there is also such a thing as irresponsible distrust.
I think that you are right. I think that you should sum up and say it is obvious on past performance that we should trust the Russians, and it is entirely unnecessary to police anything.
I think, Teller, we should shake hands at this point, because maybe later on we don't.
Szilard had won a reprieve, but he thought the cancer might return and the world still needed saving. He went back to his life of travel, dashing from project to project. He said he was looking for a market for wisdom. During the next few years, Szilard, the outsider, learned how to work at the grassroots. He spoke on college campuses all over the country to launch one of America's first political action committees, the Council for a Livable World, which is still active today, raising money for arms control candidates. Meanwhile, Szilard, the insider, managed to secure a private audience with Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev when Khrushchev visited the United Nations.
When he went in to see Khrushchev, he said, before we start talking, I brought you a small gift. And Szilard said he'd learned from his interactions with other Russians that the Russians were found, liked the Schick injector razors. And Szilard said, but there's one problem. He said, replacement blades. He said, but I'll tell you what, he says, as long as there's no war, I will guarantee that you will be supplied with razors, with replacement blades. And Khrushchev broke up and said, if there's another war, I won't shave anymore.
The conversation moved from shaving to the voice of the dolphins, and then to Szilard's many schemes for reducing the danger of war. One was to equip the Kremlin with a hotline telephone linked to the White House, so the superpower leaders could communicate quickly in a crisis. Khrushchev liked the idea. Events soon proved it was badly needed. In October 1962, the U.S. imposed a naval blockade on Cuba to force the removal of Soviet missiles from the island. Strategic forces went on alert. Szilard thought war was imminent. He picked up his suitcases and flew to Geneva.
I was at that time not in America, but in Geneva as director of CERN, the European Institute for Fundamental Particle Physics. And I was sitting there, and somebody knocks at the door. The door opens. Who is there? Leo Szilard. I said, Leo, what are you doing here? He said, well, there will be a nuclear war. I am the first refugee from America.
This time, Szilard was wrong. Khrushchev gave in, and the world came back from the brink, shaken but unharmed. Szilard returned to the U.S. 10 months later, his hotline idea was adopted.
A new weapon is installed in the Pentagon, but it's a weapon of peace. This is the teletype that will operate at the U.S. end of an open line to Moscow.
But the Cuban crisis deepened Szilard's pessimism about the fate of the world. Despite the hotline, he felt that he had failed to find a market for his wisdom in government. He turned back to the community of science. He heard that Jonas Salk, developer of the first polio vaccine, wanted to create an institute where biologists could do their research and also study its social implications. Szilard took an active part in developing the institute. He persuaded Salk to build it at La Jolla, California, an area he loved, near a university where Trude could work.
I had the feeling that he was searching for this kind of an institution really all his life because of what happened to him in the last few months of his life when he actually settled down here. And it was the first time that Leo settled any place rather than flitted around looking for, as if he was looking for something.
On May 30th, 1964, just 5 months after he moved to La Jolla, Leo Szilard died in his sleep of a heart attack. An autopsy found no trace of the bladder cancer.
For him, the impossible was possible. Impossible for others, but was possible for him. Now, when you look at his life and see what he actually accomplished and the things he did, no person in their right mind would do it. But yet, he did.
I have been asked whether I would agree that the tragedy of the scientist is that he is able to bring about great advances in our knowledge, which mankind may then proceed to use for purposes of destruction. My answer is that this is not the tragedy of the scientist, It is the tragedy of mankind.
Funding for NOVA is provided by Johnson & Johnson, the signature recognized around the world for commitment to quality healthcare products for the entire family. And Lockheed, America's aerospace company, supporting math, science, and engineering education for national technology leadership. Major funding for NOVA is provided by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by the financial support of viewers like you.